Okay, we've got a few minutes to go through the early modern army. This is GCSE Warfare Through Time, short revision clips, and we're looking at the period 1500 to 1700 here. Size of armies remain pretty similar to those in the medieval period, but of course they would change depending on circumstance. So if there was a need for a large army, such as for example Wars of the Roses or English Civil War, you may have 40,000-50,000 men suddenly in armies then. But it is the events of the Civil War between the King and Parliament in the 1640s that really do see the beginnings of the idea of a permanent standing army existing, even in peacetime. Big armies were becoming normal now, not just in England, but also on the continent of Europe too. If we look at the different parts of the army, the biggest proportion of the army still was the infantry during this period. Again, not a big change at all from the medieval one we've looked at before, so there's some continuity there. But it was the type of infantry that was changing. You were starting to see a combination of musketeers and pikemen now, replacing the longbowmen of the medieval army. By 1700, almost all infantrymen were armed with muskets at this point. Technology was starting to catch up with things and transform warfare during this period, make for substantial change. As well as the normal infantry, you also had the dragoons. They were a form of mounted infantry. They might have an arquebus or a musket as a weapon, and they would ride into position on small horses, but then would fight on foot. But they were a very small part of the infantry, a small part of the overall army. You also have the cavalry, of course, made up of about 1/3 of the army. They would have weapons such as swords and pistols, but they no longer wore suits of armour like knights had done in the past. They provided little protection these days against musket shot, so you might find that cavalrymen would wear just a plate armour breastplate only for protection. There was also a new addition to the battlefield during this period, which was artillery. So in the medieval period, you might have seen artillery pieces being used as cannons. In sieges, your example there would be Harfleur before the Battle of Agincourt in 1415. However, cannons now were becoming a little bit more advanced technologically. They were becoming smaller, lighter, so they were easy to move. They could be deployed with soldiers on the battlefield, and therefore artillery is a small, but it is a growing feature of armies during this period. So overall, you can see that the composition of armies was changing a little, particularly in the later 17th century after the English Civil War. You saw gunpowder weapons becoming more of a regular feature of warfare now, with the advancement of artillery and muskets, and also the idea of having a substantial permanent army even during peacetime was now beginning to be established.